Hey, so this is the Home and Garden Leaders
Yeah,
podcast. I'm sitting here with Max Heino from mucom.com. And Max, would be good if you could sort of introduce yourself. So how did you get into the company? What was your personal background before getting into working at the company? And then we'll just kind of take things from there.
got it. So I'm one of the co-founders of the company. That's how I got into things. Maybe
Mhm.
just 30, 40 seconds on my background. I really don't have a background in market finance degree, and I worked at various investment banks, private equity. I was the Boston Consulting Group, BCG, for half a year, and then
Mhm.
instead of sort of starting to build a career in management consulting, then we founded Muke. And maybe also useful a couple sentences about Muke. I'll try to make it short and sort of keep it nice and snappy. But Muke is, I guess the jargon term would be, it's an end-to-end convenience first marketplace for secondhand furniture.
Mhm.
And we handle the whole sales process of a furniture. We handle it from pickup at the seller's home or office or warehouse. If it's a private consumer or a company, we handle the whole process. So we pick the furniture up at the seller's convenience. We inspect them, we clean them up, we take studio photos, we warehouse the furniture in-house, and then we market them both domestically and internationally. And once the furniture are sold, the earnings are then wired or they're transferred to the seller's account. So this is what we're trying to build here, is sort of the most convenient, most modern way of selling furniture that you no longer need for some reason. And obviously for buyers, we want to offer a modern, convenient shopping experience. You can buy secondhand furniture without the hassle of just scrolling on marketplaces or organizing transport, etc. So it works as any modern e-commerce store. You get the return right, payment options.
This is a really interesting concept, actually. So, what you're saying is that it is a marketplace. So, you're not necessarily contacting suppliers, you're not really getting their inventory in your warehouse, but you're more so a marketplace where consumers can sell to each other, correct?
Yes, but with the caveat of this being a full service marketplace. So what this means is that we in fact do take the inventory into our own warehouse. We just don't buy it up front. So we get a commission on the sale, and we do work with quite a few suppliers, some retailers as well. So say if it's a supplier that has returns that they want to get rid of, or products that they are no longer have it in their selection, for example, this is a super easy way for them to offload that inventory, and we take care of the selling process and the logistics. So every product, whether it's a consumer selling it or a company, we take care of the transport. We take those furniture into our warehouse, we clean them up, we take the photos, we warehouse them. So
Mhm.
this is to create as much value as we can for the seller, because usually some of these are bulky furniture. They take up a lot of physical
Uh,
space. So we try to alleviate that problem and take care of that instead.
Makes sense. Gotcha. Okay. What's the specific reasoning behind this specific strategy? Like, I have some thoughts on this because I read a couple of books actually from BCG as well, partially, but I just like to hear your thoughts on it because it's a really unique concept to an extent. Yeah.
Oh, totally. And this, I mean, furniture, it is the only large consumer segment, with the exception of cosmetics, where this end-to-end model isn't already operating at scale.
Hmm.
This has been sold for cars. Kazoo is doing this, companies are doing this in the US. It's been sold for electronics. Say another Finnish circular economy company, Swappy, is doing this for iPhones. Obviously, Back Market in France is doing this type of approach for electronics. And you have a lot of examples in the clothing segment that do this
Hmm.
exact same thing. Be it Sellpy or Zalando does a form of this. There are a lot of domestic players in every country doing this in clothing. So furniture is the only one where this hasn't been done, this end-to-end model. And we're, as far as I know, we're the only, or at least the first ones in Europe, scaling this concept.
Hmm.
And furniture, this is where a lot of value can be created for the seller. Once again, because these objects, they take up a lot of space in your physical space where you live or at your office. So it's a huge problem and a bottleneck for these sellers. And that's where we can create a lot of value. And we even see, based on consumer research, that this is where most of the value can be created. So sellers care about getting rid of the furniture they no longer want. They want to get rid of those quickly. And that's where we come in and we pick them up at your convenience.
Yeah, it's with fashion specifically. I think it's very intuitive thing to an extent, right? For people to come up with this, I think with furniture, because it's a bit less fast paced, right? Because with fashion, you have like all these weird trends and they're there for a couple months and then people don't want to have their clothes anymore. I think with furniture, this is also the case to an extent, right? Because there's trends that switch and it's pretty tricky to create them yourself consistently. So yeah, it does make sense to have a platform for that. I really like this. Actually, it's it's a very nice strategy you have in place there.
It does come with it is not as scalable as just having, or you can scale it. Of course, it's scalable, but it is not, you can scale it as quickly as, say, a pure play SaaS or just a marketplace where, say, like eBay Kleinanzeigen or Blocket or these type of marketplaces in the Nordics, or Sellency, for example, in France. They can scale super quickly. But once again, I think the value we're offering is different, and in some cases it's superior, or at least I would hope so.
Yeah, and I think to an extent this also serves as a moat, right? Because it's not very easy to start to compete with you.
Yeah.
But it's also kind of a platform. It's very interesting, right? Because if you just have a website where you're connecting buyers and sellers, and that's all there is to it, at least in the beginning stages, it's quite easy to copy. But if there is all this effort that has to be put in for someone and all this startup cost, all this work that needs to be done, it makes it actually a bit more attractive as a strategy, right? Because you actually have, like, there's actual protection, right? Someone just can't just come in and do exactly what you're doing because it's really hard to replicate, right?
Oh yeah, exactly. I mean, on both sort of strategies, if you look at the sort of digital only and this sort of ops heavier model, both of them have their advantages and disadvantages. But it's been working really good so far, and we have some super good feedback from the users as well.
Gotcha. What I'm curious to know is, so obviously the reason why you got into it is quite clear because it just makes strategic sense, right? You're from BCG, so it does make sense. And then what were sort of some of the initial challenges that you had to overcome with this business?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that all the challenges are solved in a perfect way yet. But of course, like the first 2 years, we created the company in the summer of 2019. And for the first year and a half, 2 years, almost, we were totally bootstrapped. So we had zero like extra cash. It was just, I put in like 5K of my own money, this type of stuff. And then we had some business loans. We were bootstrapped in the beginning, and there it was really nice to see that it still grew sort of organically without this growth capital injection. But of course, when you're dealing with a totally new concept, like this is not something that consumers, it's not like opening up another restaurant. People already know what it's all about. So here, the business model, it's quite difficult to communicate the value in a short and snappy way from a marketing and awareness perspective, because this concept has never been done in Europe. So people don't immediately grasp, okay, so what happens? Okay, they come to my house, they pick up my stuff, what happens then? So it's hard to crystallize and condense the value we're offering in one sort of snappy, scalable marketing sort of unique selling point that you can slap on a bunch of ads and scale it up. That's one of the things. And obviously it's the same with starting any business, recruiting, finding the new people. Obviously in this specific case, logistics and how we handle those, that's one of the more difficult things to sort of solve. Everything, we had to learn everything from the get-go, how to clean and inspect furniture in a fairly large scale quite quickly, how to take professional good studio photos basically on a conveyor belt style, so that we can't have this one product, for example, because we can only sell it once. We can't have a half a day photo shoot for that product and take super perfect pictures that we can sell them over and over and over again. They have to be photographed once, and the sort of quality of that product has to be communicated to a potential buyer. So we can't spend more than a couple of minutes rooftops per product to photograph them. So, and all of this had to be sort of learned, and it's been a super rewarding journey. But yeah, so that was one of the sort of tougher things, was just growing it organically without a growth budget. But we've since raised capital that has VC capital that has sort of alleviated those pains. But once again, the moat we're trying to build, as you said, the logistics part of it being the sort of main driver of the moat, that's one of the core challenges here.
It's really interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I also imagine it's quite difficult to market, right? Because you have, like, normally what you can do is you can use like a 3D staging kind of setup. You can have a 3D model of the product. You just put it in there. So here it's quite interesting from like a systems point of view. How does it solve actually? Because it's a really tough one, right? Because like if it's a sofa or whatever it is, right, it has to be moved. It has to be put in an attractive setting. There's so many different pieces with this to make sure that it's actually attractive. So that's very interesting, actually. Nice.
We're always looking into various ways of doing that better. Just 3D models, for example. I guess with the photos we're already taking from different angles, theoretically you could do a 3D model here, but there's definitely quite a clear reason why furniture is sort of the laggard within the consumer segments of moving online from sort of brick and mortar physical stores to online. All the other segments have moved there way more quicker and more aggressively, and furniture is sort of lagging behind. And I guess the core reason for that is that a lot of consumers still, they want to see the product, they want to see how it would look in their physical space. And that's why we really have to take high quality pictures and make sure that we have all required info available for the buyer for these products.
Yeah, I also think there's, like, if you would have a 3D model, but I think it's like maybe it's too hard to achieve, but there's apps. So I've seen this with some of our clients where you basically take it's a phone app, right? It gets installed, connects to the camera, and then it kind of it estimates the sizing of everything.
Yeah.
And it just puts the piece into place. And then you can see on your phone sort of how it looks. And then another thing that I've seen work as well is that people on a website, they have a sizing toggle. Right. So here's how much space you have that is looking to be filled, and then they can sort of move it kind of like on this diagram. And then it just gives them appropriate options for whatever sizing they have, which helps to an extent, right? But there's obviously a consumer segment that just likes to buy from brick and mortar. I think it's the same with any kind of e-commerce, right? But specifically with furniture, because it's a visual thing. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. So how would you describe the current situation of the company?
After we took in the VC, we took in our sort of pre-seed round last year, and now a bit of a larger seed round in the spring of this year. So we're sort of gearing from a VC perspective, we're sort of in between seed and Series A rounds. So what we're trying to do is gearing up towards a Series A. So that's one perspective to look at the sort of development of the company. That's where we are in from the VC perspective. Then, as I said, we started in Finland, with Helsinki being our headquarters. We expanded to Stockholm, and in terms of, so we're going to hit some 4.55 million revenue this year. We've sold some 25,000 furniture, 5.5 million euros in funding from these two funding rounds from the venture capital funds. We have some 40 employees, and in terms of the vision and goal, what we want to do is in the next 5 years is to become the market leader for secondhand furniture in Europe. To really scale this convenience model from the Nordics. We want to scale it to other parts of Europe as well. And to achieve this goal, we have we call it the 4-point secret. It's not so secret, a master plan. So this is sort of a Elon Musk Tesla ripoff as well. So what we're trying to, or the steps to achieve this goal are basically the following. The first one we've already talked a bit about, but we need to become the most efficient entity at moving furniture from point A to B through an interplay of operations and technology. Of course, if you go on our site, mute.com, it looks sort of designy, and I don't know if it looks flashy, but at least it looks like nice and tidy on the outside. But sort of in the background, there's like an operations engine whirring. So if some people look at us as a design or furniture company, but the truth is that we're a logistics and technology company behind the scenes, and that's sort of how we look at ourselves internally. The second point of the master plan is to gain the best understanding of market drivers of prices, trends, or opportunities through a systematic collection of data. And then we want to use data in smart ways to improve our offering. As you already alluded to, there are some trends, there are different types of consumer cohorts that prefer different types of furniture and interior design. And what we really do is we collect what type of users buy what type of furniture, how quickly those sell, at what price point, what sort of brands, what style category, which market do people in Finland buy more from Sweden or vice versa. So we try to collect as much data there and sort of want to use that in nice ways to improve the offering. Also, we of course need to create a sort of unparalleled shopping experience for buyers and a really smooth journey for the sellers to just scale this in an efficient way, whether the sellers are private consumers or businesses. And simultaneously, you talked about working with suppliers. That's something that we've started doing now in the past 4 or 5 months. And it's been really awesome to see that there's a huge sort of inbound interest for retailers, just asset owners who are moving offices or even manufacturers. Okay, they want to offload inventory that they don't currently need, for example, and this is one way to do it. The fourth point of the plan is to then, of course, expand geographically and offer this service to more people. So that's sort of the vision, how we look at Muke and how we see the goals currently.
And I can imagine, because it's so heavy on the operations, that there's a lot of scale economies as well eventually, right? Where you find like a small thing and then the ripple effect of that just saves so much cost in the long term as well. So it's really interesting. Yeah. Because you must be moving like really high volume eventually, right? So there must be a lot of potential for that as well. What I'm curious to understand is how you solve pricing. So basically, do you let the people who want to sell on your platform dictate what amount do they want? Do you give them recommendations or sort of, how do you call this, like guidance posts? Right? Or how is that solved?
Yeah, that's also because that's one of the super interesting things. That's one of my sort of favorite things to work on, and that work for pricing, it's actually just now kicking up speed, and that's something I'll be working on today, like for the rest of the days, is looking at our pricing model. When someone wants to sell a piece of furniture, let's say if you're a consumer, it's like a 1-2 minute process. Click, you take a picture of the furniture and you answer like 2-3 questions about it, and then you get a price estimate from us within the hour usually. And this price estimate, we always give it as a range because there is quite a bit of ambiguity here. As you know, with any secondhand, say if I put a stool in front of you, like, and ask you how much is this worth, that's really a super interesting and core question, because the value of that secondhand object, it's going to be totally different for you and someone who really wants that one, who's been looking for that specific piece in that material, that color, whereas someone might see it as having negative value. They just want to get rid of it. They would even pay to get rid of it. So this is really where the data and sort of what we're trying to learn internally comes in. Currently, we have a formula that gives us the pricing based on a few sort of core attributes about the furniture, but we still have to give a price range. For example, if you want to sell your sofa, say if it's a like mid-end sofa, we would communicate then to the seller that we're going to sell this sofa for 350 euros to 520 euros. And then it also gives you an earnings range based on that. And the way we solve this is that it comes into our warehouse. Once we validate that the condition is what the seller communicated it was, we clean it up if need be. Then once it's posted on the site, we obviously try to do all these things, for example, the cleaning and studio photos. So we presume that we can sell this furniture at a premium compared to, say, for example, a run-of-the-mill peer-to-peer marketplace. So we would place it at a certain initial price, and then we follow how many clicks this piece is getting. And then during the sales process, the price can and will be lowered if it's not sold within a couple of weeks. Then the price is lowered based on this price range that we're giving. But we still have a lot to learn there when it comes to the pricing. It can be done a lot better. It's worked quite well so far with this initial formula that we have, but there's a lot to solve here still and a lot of improvements on the way. So
yeah, I guess it also depends on the needs of the seller to an extent as well, right? Because you don't want to, like some people, they just want it sold fast because they need the money now, or they want to have the money now for something else. And some people are a bit more patient, so they really want to maximize the value that they're getting out of the transaction. So I think that's also really, really interesting piece with this at the end of the day, right? Because it's like there's so many factors on the seller side, but also on the demand side, right? So it's matching those two variables that is probably, it sounds super interesting, honestly. I'm pretty excited actually for you, because this sounds like it's a really nice strategy overall. Yeah, like how does this put in place?
I mean, there is quite a bit of complexity here and super interesting problems to work with, or challenges rather. And that's what the team is so excited for, with both this sort of matching demand and supply, seeing that, okay, if we take in too much of some type of furniture that doesn't sell, then that's going to be a problem from an operations perspective for us. And exactly what you said, sellers, they might have different needs. Maybe someone just wants to get rid of it. Someone wants to get a lot of money, but they just don't want to do the hassle. So it's good for them that we take the piece and we do all these things to sort of increase the value of that furniture, and we warehouse it, and we can still get this nice earning for the seller. So there are a couple of things here to juggle, but so far we've seen that most of the value is created in us picking that furniture up and actually taking care of this whole sales process. So if you're a student and you want to maximize your earnings and you're willing to sit on the sofa until you get exactly the 250 euros that you want for it, whatever your price may be, then you might be better off selling it on a peer-to-peer marketplace, of course. So it's not always a match for everyone.
And then regarding the vision that you have, right, the 4 kind of steps, what would you say has prevented you so far from achieving it, right? It sounds like it's mainly a speed issue, but it would be really interesting to understand it as well.
Yeah, it's quite a bit of things sort of coming together here. First factor is probably just some things just take time. We've had funding for a year and a half, so it's just going to take some time to tweak some things, figure some things out. And before we start to scale, we really want to know what we're scaling. For example, when we expanded to Sweden, we didn't really do our homework in an optimal way, being fully transparent. For example, we've changed our whole operations model since expanding to Sweden. And that's also a challenging thing to change, say, for example, how everything is operated in the warehouse, how we optimize our shelving, how we optimize the flow of the furniture into the warehouse, how we work with fulfillment, for example. And changing all of this while you have the in and outflow of furniture and you're scaling up, that becomes quite a bit of things to juggle there. So we want to make sure that we've nailed the sort of user experience, and at least to a sort of 80-20 degree. And we want to make sure that we know exactly what model we're scaling, and we're getting there now. So our hope is, and the target is that we're able to expand sort of second half of 2023, the latest, that we can start looking at expanding beyond the Nordics. Yeah. And then one more addition here is also the recruitment part. So that's going to take us a couple of months to find the right people also, when, say, if we want to expand somewhere else in Europe. So the talent needs to be there as well. But it's sort of a sum of a lot of parts here.
And what would be an interesting story that you'd like to share?
Yeah, there are multiple ones, and I
Yeah.
guess the funniest ones are sort of these super early stage things. I mean, we're by no means patting ourselves on the shoulders that yeah, we've made it. I mean, 4 or 5 million in revenue, that's still peanuts when it comes to market potential here, but so good so far. But when we started the company with my co-founder Ricard, it was basically a like two guys and a van type of show, and we put together a like it was literally started in a garage. So we rented a garage and started sourcing furniture and built a bit of a like home studio for the furniture. And then we had one of our first clients. This was like a month in, and they had ordered a sofa through our store that we'd thrown together really quickly on WooCommerce, and we were going to deliver the sofa home to him, and we had a rented van, and we were driving from the garage to his home. I think it was a Saturday or something. It was raining quite a bit, and then at some point I noticed that Ricard was driving, and I just looked like into the sort of storage because shit, like the door's open back there. And then we went to look at the sofa, like one or two pillows were missing, and then we had to drive back to pick up so we found the two pillows on the way back to the garage. And then luckily we had like two examples, like two pieces of that exact same sofa. So we just threw in the wet pillows into the garage, and we took the sort of clean ones from the other sofa. Then we delivered the sofa to the buyer. He was super happy, and we carried it inside and placed it in his living room. And then we went back to clean the pillows that we picked up from the road, and eventually sold that sofa as well. But yeah, so looking back,
Luckily the sofa didn't fall out, or
yeah, totally.
no accidents happened, etc.
Totally.
Right?
Totally, yeah. That I haven't heard of that type of stuff happening anymore this year, but it's always when you're working with operations and logistics, there are always like funny things that can happen. But that's one that I sort of remember like half vividly.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, I had a similar story recently with Gustav. I think it's a person that we interviewed last for this podcast, actually.
Yep.
He also, like, he became the CEO of the company eventually, but some of the founders, initially, they were delivering the furniture themselves through all of Denmark, and they had like a bunch of orders to deliver at once because they didn't want to outsource it yet. And basically, the guy was driving for like 12 hours straight, 20 hours straight, because they had like one day on the weekend where they would deliver everything.
Oh boy.
Nothing happened there as well. So it's, yeah, it's pretty crazy. Okay. Yeah. And what they do as well, just because maybe this is valuable for you, maybe not, right? But they also, like, they were able to lower their shipping costs because they initially had it outsourced for a little bit as well, from what I understand. And then they were handling the shipping themselves too. And if you have such a strong operational focus, it may make sense to do that here as well, right? Because it's not massive, but I think they're getting like a 33% savings on their shipping cost. So like once you have the volume, it really starts to add up, I think, right?
Oh yeah. And that's why so we're doing part of the deliveries, or the bulk of the deliveries we're doing ourselves, because our own sort of in-house fleet is driving around and picking up furniture as well. So we can sort of combine deliveries and pickups and optimize it from a route perspective and a time per visit perspective. So that's something that works for us currently. And obviously we can take the whole shipping fee without sort of giving it to an outsourcing party. But yeah, we're always looking at smart ways to sort of streamline it. And if we can outsource something and it's viable and smart from a unit economics perspective, then we'll of course do it. So, and what company was Gustav working at?
My Danish is not good. I can send you the link later.
Oh yeah, please do.
Because my Danish is not, like, if I'm going to pronounce it, I'm just going to butcher it a lot. Möbelkompagnet.dk or something like this. But yeah, I'll send you the link after.
Okay. Yeah.
Then what would you say are sort of the 3 kind of key takeaways that you would like to share with everyone who's listening?
I'm not sure like if we should do this from a furniture perspective or from an entrepreneurship perspective. Maybe the entrepreneurship perspective is more interesting here, or it's at least sort of more broadly.
Sure, yeah.
So maybe the first one would be that it's entrepreneurship, like there's this whole concept of entrepreneurial freedom. And that's a total lie, by the way. I mean, it depends on what you're doing, of course, but in most cases, that is totally a lie. And entrepreneurship, like when I compare it to sort of some of the finance jobs I've done, it's more peaks and valleys. The peaks are higher, the valleys are lower, and it's it's extremely rewarding, but it's tasking. And I've been talking to a lot of other founders, and the sort of one big like downside is that if you're ambitious and committed, there's this constant nagging. Whatever you're doing, if you're on the beach with your girlfriend, you're at a restaurant, you're at your mom's birthday party, it's like 80 mosquitoes in your ear constantly, and you could always be doing something to bring the company forward. So there's this noise that's constantly gnawing away at you. And other founders, I've talked to the founders at Swappy, for example, the sort of secondhand iPhone company, and Endemic Sound in Sweden. They all say that you can't get rid of the boy. Like they try to get rid of it, but some of them they try to do extreme sports or something to sort of get into a flow state and forget. So you have to be, maybe it's extremely rewarding, but you have to choose something that that's a bit of a cliche, but you really have to choose something that you're excited about, because otherwise you'll probably quit. And it's really, really rewarding. If anyone listening is at all inclined towards entrepreneurship, like just do it, just try it out. And if you choose something that you're super excited about, then like Monday is going to be the best day of the week probably. But it is in many ways it's simultaneously a trade-off.
I think there's also, to a small extent, not massively, but I think there's a small genetic component with it as well, right? Where I think that there's certain, you can just have, to an extent, a little bit of bad luck with your genes, and you're just going to feel a lot of negative emotion naturally, right? Yeah. And then it can be really overwhelming to a big extent, but it's also something that can be trained, obviously, right? So I don't think it's just it's the whole nurture versus nature debate, right? At the end of the day, it's always both, and it makes a bit more sense to believe whatever is helping you at the end of the day, right?
Absolutely.
So it's quite interesting as well. Yeah.
And that's a super compelling topic to myself as well. And we could talk about that for a long time, but what I think really helps, if you look at like big personality traits, obviously neuroticism. If you're high in trait neuroticism, it's probably going to be tougher. And something that really helps, at least helps me personally, I'm really high in like trait openness, curiosity, openness, and just being just open for new ideas. That's something that I found it super beneficial.
Nice. Yeah. Good that you read personality books as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's when I get the time to read, that's the type of stuff.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics too, because you can look at how some of these traits relate to work performance, right? And you can make much less biased decisions in regards to who you're hiring and how good they are. To an extent, right? There's some traits where, for example, I think conscientiousness, right, which is like, to those who don't know, right, it's basically the ability of someone to work hard in a structured manner, et cetera, right? Just to be a diligent human, essentially. Yeah. And obviously, if you give someone a survey, they're just going to say, because it's like an obviously good thing that people know employees are looking for, right? Employers are looking for, and it's really tricky to value at the end of the day, right? But there's some where it's not clear if it's objectively good, or people can't really, you can't just answer whatever in the test, and then the right results come out. So we have this whole testing structure for people before we let them in, essentially, where it's they get a specific value assigned to everything, and then overall they get a number. And then if the number is higher than a certain amount, they just basically go through, right? So it's
so it's like a funnel or a cutoff.
Exactly.
Yeah, totally. And by the way, a caveat, I'm by no means saying that, I've super optimized my work, I'm so effective every day. No, I mess up every day in terms of my time use. I use time. I commit some part of the day to stupid stuff that I should have done otherwise. So it's a constant learning process, and totally like myself, I'm trying to improve here a lot. But yeah, so just want to offer that caveat.
What are some of the sports, the more extreme ones that people were recommending to you?
Yeah, this I mean, some like what I like to do. I like skiing, and
Oh, same, yeah.
like off-piste skiing is something I do myself. Like
Yeah.
I try to do like three trips a year. Obviously, I live in Finland. It's way different if you're in Germany and you can just drive a couple of hours to the Alps. So there it's
Yeah.
a bit different. But yeah, some people do skydiving. Some people do rock climbing. This type of stuff is. These are probably the most common. One guy does paragliding as well. So it's usually like one of these things.
Yeah, that's pretty extreme. Yeah. Yeah. I'm too risk averse for this. I just do running here and there. Yeah, because like
The risk averse
paragliding, for
index is going
example, if
up
something
when
goes wrong.
approaching 30. So yeah,
Exactly, right? Yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, maybe there's like one more takeaway, and then I think it would make sense to wrap it up because we're almost at an hour.
we can maybe two quick ones. This goes back to the first one goes back to the sort of optimization as well. This is something that my co-founder Rikard, he was at McKinsey for a year and a half, almost 2 years as well. So we're like a MBB, like management consulting co-founder pair. So we talk a lot about the 80-20 rule. We try to apply it as best we can in our own work. Obviously, it doesn't always help, but it's a really useful lens, I feel like, when you're looking at your work and approaching it from a sort of data perspective. So the 80-20 rule, it's a super like awesome concept, and it applies basically to everything in life and everything in the universe. Like 80% or 20% of the trees have 80% of the mass, and 20% of the stars have 80% of the mass, and 20% of the patients take up 80% of the resources, and 20% of the customers, and you bring like 80% of the sales, this type of stuff. So what we really try to do ourselves and encourage everyone to do is, just when you're working at something, ask yourself, like, what's really the driver behind this? Should I now spend 2 hours optimizing these ad campaigns, pictures, and really polishing them? Or should I try to use that time in a more scalable, more productive manner, sort of going at the grass root of the problem? So that's something that we try to promote internally and do as much as we can. And if you can adopt that sort of methodology, then you're probably going to be better off than if you don't look at things from that perspective.
Yeah, I also have a rule for myself where if it's like a thing that may lead to an incremental improvement, I usually don't do it. Because it's like there's things that can lead maybe to a drastic improvement, or for sure to a drastic improvement, or at least worst case to an incremental improvement, but at least it's sure, right? It's a sure thing. That really helps me as well to kind of keep my time organized in that way, because otherwise it just gets really messy, right? Because there's so many things to do, and as you said, you have like to an extent like this constant voice in your head, right? So like you just gotta have some kind of filter to apply to it, where you can say, okay, like here I should listen to it, and here I should probably just ignore it, right? It's very interesting, because I'm also seeing a lot of people just kind of doing whatever they feel like to an extent, right? Or whatever feels good to them, or whatever their emotions dictate them. And they're just not getting the most optimal outcomes that they could be getting otherwise, right?
Yeah. Oh, totally. And still, I mean, with all these points, maybe it goes back to the entrepreneurship and leadership and communication and expectation setting. We should be as ambitious as we can. We should try to make our team as inspired and working as efficiently as possible. But on the sort of flip side of that coin, it's good to keep in mind and be like partially forgiving. We're all human. We all mess up. We're not like rational robots. And there's always going to be sort of a spillover, and it's good to keep that in mind as well. At least I try to find
for sure.
some semblance of balance here.
Yeah, because like people are in software, right? And even if you have a piece of software, sometimes there's a scenario it can't process. It's yeah. Makes sense. Yeah. And especially if you're in a field where it's or like the strategy you have, the approach you're taking from an operational point of view, not strategically, but operationally changes a lot. It really like you can't be like crazy process driven at the same time, right? Like you have to optimize, but like you can't really put that much process into place either because it may change in 6 months or so, right? Like it's pretty interesting in that regard. Yeah. Okay, cool. Any last words? We have 2, 3 more minutes if you want.
I mean, I think we touched on some super interesting topics here. If possible, and if the podcast develops nicely, happy to be on a second time in the future, of course. And maybe we can book a chat and talk about personality traits
Oh yeah, for sure. I was thinking about it as
some
well.
other time. And of course, happy to hear your insight. Like one thing, maybe a third takeaway is that like try to get help wherever you can, and don't assume that you know things the best, but you should try to learn from people who are better at certain things. So when you speak with other people in the industry and when you're doing sort of the consulting work here, is like any ideas that you might have, feel free to send me a message and pitch it over. And of course, can't jump off without plugging Nuke one more time. Like super keen on hearing any feedback. If someone is listening, wants to give feedback on the concept, or even wants to work with us in some type of way, you can find us on Nuke. That's mjuk.com, nuke.com.
Nice.
But thanks for the invite, Jan. This was a super interesting discussion. As I mentioned in the very beginning, this is super useful for myself as well, because I get to sort of segment my own thoughts on this topic.